Hey everybody, how's it going? It is the month of May. It's that time again. It is time for our virtual monthly meetup. With me, I have our producer of the monthly meetup, Nitish. Nitish, how are you doing, buddy?
I'm doing great, Darren. The weather is really looking good. I mean, it's really getting warm.
It is really, really getting warm here. I'm in the U.S., of course. So 1 second here. Let's see. In to see. I got to convert over. It is today 35 degrees Celsius
Wow.
here today where I'm at, which is about 95 degrees Fahrenheit for those people in the U.S. Yeah, it is extremely hot here. It's the hottest day of the year. So I'm going to stay inside where it's air conditioned. Which is a good idea, right? So we've got a lot of stuff to talk about today. We've got two really smart people that I love talking to. Graham and Dave are going to come on and talk about some things that we've I'll say that, especially Graham, is going to show you. I know we have NoSQL, right? And a lot of people, okay, document databases, they think about, okay, your JSON documents and stuff, and then all the cool things that those people in the relationship database world have, you can't have. So you can't have your cake and eat it. But I'm here to tell you, you can. You can have your cake and eat it. Dave is going to talk about some really cool features where all the SDKs are getting some cool stuff. So that's going to be really great. But before we get started with all these cool things that we're going to talk about with that, it's all around this. We have a new version of Couchbase Server. We have 7.1. And this is huge. Like 7.0, if you think about it, didn't come out that long ago. It really wasn't that long ago. We had Couchbase 7 come out, and we had collections and scopes. We had all these amazing new features that came out that people are loving, and people are upgrading. And of course, we've got patches that came out like 7.0.1, 2, and 3. Mostly bug fixes. Some other features came out in those, but 7.1 is huge. Most companies would actually call this a full release, like an 8.0, but no. At Couchbase, we're saying this is 7.1 instead, Neo, and it is amazing. Now, I can't talk about all the features today because we got a bunch of other people going to talk about some other things, but I want to highlight a couple for you, Nitish, that if you're watching and you're interested and I'm here to tell you, one, you should upgrade right away. This thing is huge. I've been running it for probably about 4 or 5 months now. Since we internally were giving builds out, I've been running it, and the performance, night and day. It's pretty darn amazing. One, high density storage. We have a new storage engine called Magma. If you think about it, the Couchbase journey has been really interesting. In 2011 and 12, we were primarily started as a database in memory only, where everything with Memcache had to be in memory. And now we're talking in 2022 that now with high density storage, you basically only need to keep about 10% of the actual database in memory, and the rest of it can be on disk. Now, for people that need this use cases where they have massively large databases, 5, 6 terabytes in size, this becomes extremely attractive. You can drop your infrastructure bill considerably because of the fact that we can basically keep better use by using this new storage engine. So it's at the bucket level, which is also really cool. Most people don't know this, is that you could basically have one bucket be using high density storage, the new Magma storage engine. You have another one that's not using it, using the current storage engine that we have today, right? So that's really kind of awesome. The second cool feature is we got a new Tableau connector. So if people that like Tableau, writing, maybe you're doing some analytics stuff and all those kind of cool things that Tableau provides, we have support for that now. My favorite feature of 7.1 is ARM support, because I run an M1 MacBook Pro, and now there are ARM images, container images for Docker, not only for Neo, the release 7.1, but also for Sync Gateway 3. So if you're building a development environment, you're doing mobile or whatever you're doing, you now can very quickly get the latest ARM stuff on your Mac M1, and it just works out of the box. It's super awesome. So that's completely amazing, and Aaron supports it. You wrote a really great article a blog article about UDFs, and UDFs are not user-defined fields. They are user-defined functions instead, which is super awesome. There's a blog post out on our website about this, right?
Yeah.
And so go to the website, check out the blog post that Nitish wrote recently about user-defined functions. They're really cool. It's like stored procedures, but they're written in JavaScript, which is, according to Stack Overflow, the most popular language on the planet. So if you're a JavaScript developer, or if you guys have a business need and you want to run some business logic on on servers, we have user-defined functions now that can give you this super awesome functionality. I like it a lot. I read the Tish article. I want to use them soon. And I don't mind JavaScript. It's okay. It's okay. So obviously we have some other improvements in indexing, and there's a bunch of things around analytics that we have that are out there. And my recommendation, if you go to the what's new page that we have, you can go see all the features inside of 7.1. All I'm here to tell you is it's a huge release. I know it's a point release, but most companies would call this a full version. But we are Couchbase. We do so much cool stuff that this is just a point release for us. So we keep just completely making Couchbase and redefining and making it cooler and cooler and cooler with new features based on user feedback. So I am extremely excited about that. Now, it's some SDK news. Everybody probably knows by now that one of my favorite languages, if not my favorite language, is Kotlin. Now, Kotlin has been great on mobile. We talked about this a couple of months ago. There's a new version of the mobile SDK, and it supports Kotlin on mobile, which is awesome for Android developers. But we're also bringing in Kotlin for regular SDK people. So if you want to build an API, maybe you're a Spring Boot person that's building APIs with Kotlin, or you're using one of the other Kotlin libraries for building APIs. We have full support for Kotlin now. That means you're going to get flow support, which is awesome. It's its way of handling asynchronous programming through coroutines. I highly recommend checking this out. It's pretty good for Kotlin developers. Now, another big announcement that I have, and I know that we've already had so much. There's more. There is more. So we are announcing our Couchbase Connect 2022. It's going to be virtual. It is going to be on October 6th. So set the date on your calendar. We have a CFP open for the speakers. So anybody that wants to go in and maybe speak about what you've done at Couchbase, that's open until June 17th. So that's not a lot of time. So it's about a month. My recommendation is get it in now. And we're looking for anybody that, if you're a Couchbase customer, you want to talk about all the cool things you built, please put a call for a presentation in. Ping us on social and stuff. We love talking to customers. We love to hear about great stories. Last year, we had so many people come speak. Pepsi came and talked, did stuff. There's a bunch of other companies did it. So if they did it, you could do it. So my recommendation is go out there and open one of those up. We have a blog article. The links have kind of went down and down there. We'll also have them in chat. So if you need, just go ahead and click on those links. So also, Stack Overflow, since we're all developers here, right, has a survey. And my recommendation is everybody go and fill that out. It's really important. A lot of times people use this to try to gauge like what SDKs are popular and how people are building software and stuff. And it helps a bunch of companies, pretty much anybody in the building, anybody that's building tools for developers, we use this report and we take it seriously. So please fill that out if you're a developer. I know that it's a little bit long. I filled it out. It took me about 10 or 15 minutes, but it really helps the entire industry that builds tools for developers understand what the landscape looks like. And you are helping out your fellow developers when you do that, because everybody has a better understanding of what the world and the atmosphere looks like in 2022 for developers. Finally, if you want to hang out and talk with me, Natish, or anybody else live, we have a Discord now. We have forums, of course, and forums is super awesome. You can go ask your questions the time you want. But we have Discord, and that is more of a live thing. I run it all the time. I'm usually hanging out in the mobile channel, but I also hang out in a couple other channels. Please join in on the Discord. Send us a message. If you have questions, you don't want to ask them on forums, you can literally ask them on Discord. We have no problems with that. I like it. Honestly, I'm a forums guy. I like answering questions on forums, but I really like Discord because I can get more information instantly. It's that instant feedback where if I have to like ask a question about the problem you're having, it's so much easier to ask you in real time. I can say, hey, is this happening or is this happening? Did you try this? And usually with the forums, you have to wait for like 18 hours for someone to see that you answered their reply and came back. Discord is just a cool way of doing it because it's more of that like Slack one-on-one feedback, which I extremely enjoy because I just like talking, as everybody knows. But with that, I believe we're going to get started here. We have Graham. Graham is a principal engineer at Couchbase. Graham, how are you doing today?
Hey, Aaron. Yeah, good, thank you.
Awesome. Principal, for those you don't know, means extremely smart. Graham is one of our smartest people out there. He does a lot of stuff with our SDKs, and with 7.1, we've basically went through and we've added some new stuff. And Graham, I'm really excited to hear you talk about what we have, what providing to the SDK people and stuff. So Graham, if you want, we'll go ahead and show your screen, and I'll jump off, and you can maybe tell some people about what's cool and new with the SDKs and 7.1 release.
Yeah, very excited to, Aaron. Thanks for that roundup. So I'm the transactions lead, so I'm going to be focusing today on what we brought to the transactions in the SDKs. It's going to be a catch up of not just what we've released alongside 7.1, but what we've been up to over the last few months, just to kind of bring people up to speed with the cool new stuff that we've added into transactions. So I'm not going to assume any knowledge. You guys might not have used our transactions yet. I'm just going to give like a very quick example to kind of get you guys up to speed. So these are multi-document, they're ACID, they're distributed transactions. I'll just hit like the key features here. My colleague David is going to be doing more of a drill down, more of a demo on the Python version of transactions later on. So you'll get to see, kind of how to use it in a bit more detail there. I'll just hit the main bullet points. It is Lambda based, so you write your code inside an anonymous function inside a Lambda. The idea, the central philosophy is that you give us your transactional logic and we try and make it happen. And we'll do that in the face of transient errors, nodes being rebalanced, and so on. We'll retry the logic if necessary. We'll take care of errors. We've really tried to make it as easy to use as possible. Along those lines, you're also using your programming language. You've got that full flexibility here. I've got a Java example. But you might be using PHP. You might be using Python. So you can do your conditional logic just in your own programming language. You're not trying to rewrite it in a bespoke language to try and send it down to in a server. We allow you to do KV operations and nickel operations in the same transaction, mixing them up. It's actually a bit of a spoiler for later on, because this is one of the features that we've added recently, and something we're very excited about. So I'll show you a little bit more about that later on. So you've got the full flexibility of nickel. You've got the full performance of key value. You can use both as and when it makes sense. Along the performance theme, we offer, it's a recommitted isolation level. It basically means fast. There's a reason that most production databases default to recommitted. It's extremely quick. And we're also extremely scalable. This is one of the huge bonuses of Couchbase transactions. There are 0 points of contention or failure under the hood. There's no centralized transaction manager, nothing like that. So it's going to scale. Basically, you add more nodes, you're not going to get quite linear performance, but you're not going to be too far off either. So that's a quick recap of how our transactions look like. So let's look at what's new. The big new feature that we've rolled out this year is massively increased language support. So we started with transactions with Java back in January of 2020. We had C++ late that year in beta form. We had .NET early the next year. And it's really this year that we've massively accelerated that language rollout. February brought Go and Node, two very popular languages. May has also brought Python and PHP. And that's most of the core SDKs now covered, because you can also use Scala. Scala and Kotlin can use the Java SDK directly. So it's really just Ruby and C++ GA. C++ in the beta, as I mentioned, will be GA later. And those are under active development at the moment. But the core message here is like, almost regardless of your language, you are good to go. You can now use transactions. A big part of the driver for this, as you see, we got 4 of the languages done this year, is that we now have a very high performance C++ implementation of the transactions protocol that we can now use from Node and Python and PHP. So that's been extremely useful and has really accelerated the efforts. Probably goes without saying, all these implementations, of course, implement the same transaction protocol, totally interop completely 100%. They're also tested to the same standard. We have an internal transactions test framework we call Fit. It's client server. It makes sure that every single test we write gets run against all of the core implementations that are all tested to the same very high standard. We've also ensured that we have a very consistent API across all the languages. As you've come to expect from Couchbase, we make sure that all the SDKs are familiar. You can jump between them easily. So here's the same transaction written in Java and Node. Both are using lambdas. They both get a document. They both take the content from the document and modify it, and then they replace the document. So you can see very similar API. We also respect each platform's idiosyncrasies. So Node, obviously async await, and you've got that going on here. So yeah, massive new language rollout. Let's talk about some of the new features. These haven't all come alongside 7.1. Some of them have been in some of the implementations for a while. But like I say, I don't want to make any assumptions about how much you guys have been following the new stuff that we've been adding into transactions. This stuff is pretty exciting. I just want to show it off. So I'm just going to show some of the new features that we've been adding over the last few months. The big one is nickel query support. So you can now do nickel queries inside your transaction. A huge amount of engineering effort under the hood, but it's going to be completely familiar and easy to use. If you've used nickel from the SDKs, it's almost identical. You have a transaction query result rather than a query result, basically the same. You have transaction query options rather than query options. Again, pretty much the same options. It's a feature that's so cool, it's almost hard to talk about because we've just made it work exactly how you expect it to work. It works as you would expect a nickel query to work inside a transaction. You get read committed isolation level. You get complete interoperability between KV and nickel. I'll show a little example of that in a second. If anything goes wrong with the transaction, as always with transactions, we roll everything back, including what's been done in query, and we, if necessary, start the transaction again. And of course, we've made all the APIs look very similar. Here's the PHP example. Here's the Java example. Basically the same code going on there. So yeah, this feature was actually added in Couchbase Server 7.0, but we now have support for nickel queries across all of the transaction implementations. So that's new for 7.1. Like I say, you can mix nickel and key value. So here we're inserting a document with key value, and then we're going and reading that document with nickel. So that's a read your own write. No other transaction is going to see this insert. The transaction hasn't committed yet. But because we're doing a read your own write inside the same transaction, we're able to see that. So this is really just demonstrating that kind of seamless interop that you want and expect between key value and nickel. It supports all the regular DML statements, select, insert, and so on. And it's you have the same read committed isolation level between nickel and key value. So it's a very cool feature. It's ready to use now in any of the languages. And like I say, you've got that flexibility of nickel, you've got that performance of key value, and you can use whichever is appropriate and mix and match them inside the same transaction. I think it's a pretty cool feature. Along with the query support, we've got what we call single query transactions. And this lets you literally execute a query statement. So I haven't put the full query statement here. Imagine this is a full insert. And you can just execute it as a transaction. So literally, you just use the regular SDK, and you say it's as transaction, and now you're going to get transactional ACID semantics from that statement. If anything goes wrong, it's going to be rolled back. It's going to be retried if necessary. If there was a transient error, if there was a write conflict with another transaction, these events would cause that to be automatically retried for you under the hood. So it's the same principle as the Lambda. You tell us what you want the transaction to do. We try and get it done and we try and abstract those retries and that error handling from you. The third sort of cool feature that we've got that's come out in transactions recently is custom metadata collections. So transactions use metadata documents under the hood. It's kind of all abstracted away from you. It's managed automatically out of the box. You don't have to worry about this at all. You can just use transactions. It will just work. But a few people came to us with some use cases that weren't quite covered by the out-of-the-box behavior. They wanted to delete the default collections, which is where we were storing them, a few other things like that. So we added this feature. You can specify where you want those metadata documents to get stored. And you can do it either on a single transaction, or you can do it at the global config level, whichever you prefer. These are just the headline features, lots of under-the-hood improvements. There were actually 15 different protocol extensions that went into this underlying milestone. One of the top lines is that we actually had a 15% performance improvement to typical transactions, and we achieved that through a reduction in metadata writes. So it's well worth upgrading. If you're on an older version of transactions, we really recommend sort of running on the latest and greatest. So the third thing I want to talk about today, third and final thing, is the SDK integration. So for those of you who've used Java transactions in particular in the past, you know that you pulled in a separate library. It was distinct from the regular Java SDK. And you would create a sort of separate transactions object, and you'd use that to initiate transactions. And it worked fine, but we really wanted to sort of meet developers where they are. They're already using the Java SDK or the regular SDKs. You don't necessarily want to pull in a separate library, just want to get going with the existing SDK. So that's exactly what we've done. We've now integrated transactions into the SDK. You don't need that separate library anymore. You don't need to be passing around or creating a separate transactions object anymore. You just use your existing cluster object, and you've got access to transactions directly through that. But it's a very similar API. A very small amount of porting work needed to go from the transactions library to the integrated version. And if you're on Node or Go or Python or PHP, so these are all the 4 new languages that were introduced this year, or the future languages that are coming, Ruby and the GA release of C++, you don't have to worry about any of this. They are only available in SDK integrated form. If you're using Java or .NET transaction libraries, so Java is now integrated into the Java SDK as of the 3.3 release in April. So the original transactions library, you can still use it side by side with the SDK. You're not blocked from upgrading the SDK. You don't have to migrate straight away. But we do recommend that migration step. The transactions library is in maintenance mode. It's getting bug fixes only now. And it now has a lifespan of roughly 3 years. So we do encourage moving over to the SDK. There's a migration guide available. It's linked from the documentation. And like I say, it's a very, very, very similar API. So it's minimal porting effort. And with .NET, the SDK integration is coming. It will follow in the next minor release, 3.4. So that's basically it from me. Just to recap quickly, we now have much improved language support. We now have all the major SDKs are supported. We've got this improved feature set. You've got support for nickel queries, super exciting feature. We've got single query transactions, custom metadata collections. We've got the performance boost and the under the hood improvements. And we've got the transactions are now integrated into the SDKs, so very easy to pick up and work with. So yeah, that about wraps it up from me. If you need to contact us, please do. We'd love to hear from you guys. You can use the regular support channels, you can use the forums, you can use Discord. So yeah, please reach out, give us feedback, ask us questions. We do love to hear from you guys. And that wraps it up from me. Thanks very much, guys.
Graham, that was amazing. So basically what you're telling me, if you look at other, I don't want to name names, but if you look at like NoSQL database engines in general, a lot of times it's really key value and they don't talk about transactions or ACID transactions at all. And a lot of times it's one of those reasons like people say, well, I'm going to stay on my old SQL server or my old Postgres server because I'm in healthcare, I'm doing order management and I need these transactions to guarantee this data because this data is so critical, right? If I need to be able to roll back if there's a mistake and then somehow attach that and bring something up in my UI to improve this experience because this kind of data is so sensitive, right? But I would say that, one thing that we do is awesome is that I don't think people realize just how hard this is. We basically have virtual buckets, and we're handling that. If the transaction runs on a certain server, it doesn't matter if the document's on a different server in the cluster. We handle all that magic behind the scenes. We'll make sure that all happens, and it's super cool. So I would say with this release now in the SDK and stuff, there really is if you have a older system, maybe it's running Postgres or stuff like that, and maybe it's a microservice or some other architecture because of the fact that you couldn't convert over because you didn't have transaction support. Would you say that this is probably the really good time to start taking a look at that? Because really now with this transaction support hitting all these SDKs, there's very few excuses to stay on this older technology. And there's way more things you're going to get from performance and obvious scalability that we're going to provide you with our implementation of ACID transactions. Is that a correct statement?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right, Aaron. I think traditionally NoSQL databases have kind of shied away from transactions to an extent. It's extremely hard to do it safely.
It is.
Performantly.
Yeah, exactly.
And a huge amount of engineering effort has gone into this under the hood to try and make this happen. And we're very proud of what we've achieved. But ultimately, like you're abstracted from all that engineering effort. Like the intent has always been to make a very easy to use API. That's also very safe and very performant and very scalable. And I think we've achieved that.
That's amazing. So, folks, maybe if you're watching this and you're a NoSQL database person, but you don't know what we're talking about with transactions. Transactions is the ability, basically, to run something and then check to make sure that all the different things happened. And if anything you catch is bad, roll back it. Don't actually do the commit. Do not do all the things that you wanted to do. You may be inserting 2 or 3 documents into the database in different collections, but if something goes wrong with one of those, you don't want to corrupt the data or have the data be misaligned. I worked in healthcare for years, and we used transactions for order management. We would guarantee that if an order came in for like a radiology report, or like say for example somebody had to go to the lab and get blood work, we need to guarantee that all the systems knew about that, because it's not just one system. There's a whole system in healthcare called HL7. It's a messaging system. It's really complicated, and either way, transactions was the only way we can guarantee that when we put that order in for that patient to get their blood draw, that it was right. And for any reason that the data looked bad, it was missing a field or any of those kind of things happen, we would roll back that transaction. We had code to handle this so that we could guarantee that when it got to the lab, it was the right data and that nothing was wrong about this. The patient record wasn't screwed up, all those kind of things. And transactions are really critical for these kind of things. I know for a lot of people out there, they may not know about them because most NoSQL database servers don't support them. We do, and it's an amazing feature. It is literally one of the reasons why I think Couchbase is one of the coolest products in the world, because you can have your cake and eat it. You can have key value, you can have SQL, and now you have full ACID transaction supports with rollbacks, guaranteeing you availability and the ability to guarantee that your data is safe and that your data is consistent.
Yeah, absolutely right, Aaron. And I think one of the really exciting differentiators between us and the kind of traditional database is that we do have this flexibility to, you can use SQL or Nickel, but you can also bring in key value as well. So you've just got that excellent flexibility that just you cannot get outside of an NoSQL database. So you've got that. You can choose that performance. You can choose that flexibility. You've got these options that you don't have outside of Couchbase.
For people that don't know, key value is just faster by the way it works in memory, if you think about it, than a Nickel or SQL query. It's always going to be the case. Key value is just going to be faster. If we talk about computer science, we can go talk all day about this, but I mean, I'm sorry, that is it. And so the fact you can do both and mix them together, awesome. Just completely amazing. Graham, thank you and the entire team, because obviously this has been a big effort, as you kind of showed on the line. A lot of people are involved to kind of make and coordinate and make this happen, not only in Serve, but then also guarantee that all the SDKs support it and moving forward and stuff, so that no developers left behind is a story I think we want to say. I don't care what language you're on. We're not leaving any of you behind. You all are getting the same functionality as we're rolling this out. So regardless of what language you're on, we've got your back. Action support is there, and it's even better than it was before. So it sounds like really with those performance improvements to 7.1, really people should be looking to upgrade to 7.1 as soon as possible. Obviously, we recommend, test it out, make sure that all your code works with it, spin up another environment, don't go update production today because Aaron told you so. Do your due diligence in testing. But I've been running 7.1 for quite a while now, as I said earlier, and it's been amazing for me. I really think that it's an amazing release. So I really thank you for coming on, telling the people about the new SDK support, the new transaction support. Folks, go check out the documentation, go check out the links, and start with that. With that, Graham, I'm going to let you go, and I'm going to bring on another friend of mine who is super awesome. Dave is just amazing. Dave is, well, one, he's a boxer. He's got belts on his wall there, and he also has the same barber as me, which is also pretty cool, right? So I mean, we're rocking a lot of things in common when it comes down to it. We're both wearing black. It's all good. But really, Dave, I know that you came on to talk a little bit about one of my favorite languages. It's not the primary language I use, but I have used it a lot in the past. It is like the Swiss Army knife in languages. I call it Python. And I know that we have a new release, like so big that we actually made a big number change on it. And I'm hoping that maybe you could tell me and give me a little bit more details, because I know very little about the differences, but you are the expert on that. So Dave, could you maybe come through and talk to us a little bit about Python, which is a very popular language, and what's coming new with the SDK?
Yeah. All right. So we moved to 4.0, and we did it for a few reasons. Well, the big thing is we added transactions. That's certainly the biggest reason why we, well, I don't know. Now that I think of it, it isn't the biggest reason why we wanted to change it to 4.0. The reason was why under the hood we did it. To support transactions, we needed the C++ transactions library. And the C++ transactions library is using a new C++ client rather than libcouchbase, the C one. So that's a pretty big change, right? The bindings are completely new, essentially. And because of all that, we're like, oh, well, great. This is a great time to refactor things generally, remove a lot of cruft. Way back when we went from 2 to 3, 3 contained a lot of the old 2 code, and I think the original intent, this is the original intent anyway, those decisions were before my time, but I think the idea was to maybe maintain a 2 and 3 within the same code base, like complicated in some senses. And I think, although it was a great effort and it did, I believe, work great, it made the code difficult to maintain at times. The bindings, same deal. So we decided, look, we're going to 4.0. We're going to maintain the 3.0 API, but let's clean some stuff up. Let's get rid of some old stuff and make it a little more pleasant to use, more pleasant to maintain. So I made like some examples here of stuff. The Couchbase core had a lot of that 2.x stuff. That's gone. There's some other packages that are gone. We put options in the place you might suspect options should be, couchbase.options. And so if you move over with the new version, your existing code, you'll see some deprecation warnings. I'll even show one of those later. They'll just litter your logs a little bit until you move them across. And this last one, this binding's no longer exposed. The C++ object was contained inside a core object, and that core object was contained inside a bucket or a cluster. And if you used an API like this one, I'm showing you, this is PyCharm, it would show you all those functions. And they were all a little different and tricky to use. You don't really know what the keyword params would be, say, necessarily, because they, especially on the C++ or the C side, weren't completely documented and didn't make any sense to expose any of that. So we pulled all that out of there, and now they're just, quote, private, as private as something could be in Python. And I think it's going to make poking around, trying to figure out what you want to do a little bit easier. This was something we all really wanted to change. like I said before, dead code. The bindings don't have macros. If you look carefully at the bindings, you would have been like, oh, what do the macros mean? Because the macros were nested, which they needed to be. And maybe that's my personal bias. I'm not in love with C macros from a readability standpoint. So it was nice to move that to C++, where it's templates, and there's an argument maybe to be made that they aren't always the easiest things to understand, but which they aren't, but they win in the competition between macros and templates. I'll take templates. So that's the main idea. Those were all the big changes that Aaron mentioned, and the reason we went to calling it 4.0. The main thing, though, is that although it's under the hood, from the outside, things will feel about the same. When we released last week, I guess the week before, the 4.0, there are some release notes with some known issues. Things like we didn't make twisted transactions come out in 4.0.0, but it'll be coming out in probably 4.0.1. I'm literally working on it now. Single query transaction support that was discussed by Graham before didn't make it into the C++ transactions library in time. So we don't support that one quite yet, but as soon as it's in, we'll pop that in. So one of the point releases coming pretty soon. Not .1, but one of the point releases. We keep improving the API docs, but the async IO and twisted ones, probably 0.1, there'll be big changes. I seem to remember seeing some changes. The guy really owns the Python, Jared, just made some big changes there. I believe they're coming soon, so that should be in there. A couple of things that are going to come soon, but not as soon. We used to pipe the logs into Couchbase, or into rather Python logging. So you would all see it through your Python logger if you wanted. The C++ client, and for that matter, the C++ transactions lib, don't expose the underlying C++ stuff in a way that we could easily shove that into a Python logger yet. So we're going to make some changes over there to the client specifically to allow us to pop that in, and then we'll be good to go. And then all the stuff will go through your logger. For now, some of that stuff, if you enable it, you'll just see on standard out, which you can redirect as you feel necessary. The other thing that I really like, but isn't in there quite yet, is distributed tracing, so open telemetry in particular, which we add in 3.3, 3x, 3.3, whatever we're on now, before 4.0. I liked open telemetry. I liked that it was in there. We will get it in there shortly. It's a little tricky with making that efficient. And so along the way, we're going to try to make it efficient to where when you add the open telemetry, maybe you don't take this big hit performance-wise, or as big a hit at least. You'll always take some. Let's see. And then after that, I want to talk about some code examples, which I didn't quite finish writing down, but we're going to do like I'll just show you what the deprecated imports look like, and then show you like blocking and not blocking transactions. And I guess we'll finish up with, I'll make them conflict and they still work, but that's not too surprising. Let's see. So let's see, why don't we start with the deprecation example? In the old days, Couchbase cluster was where the cluster options lived, for instance. And there's a lot of examples of this. All the collection options, most but not all, lived in Couchbase.collections, and then some lived elsewhere. Super confusing, and you can poke through and find all this stuff, but it literally involved like some grepping or looking at other examples, this sort of thing. And then we wanted to kind of try to align that to something else. So what we did is we put them where we thought they belonged, which is down here in options. And if you run this right now, oops, I'm running the wrong one. Apologies. We'll get to that one. you see, hey, right up here at the top, I like it. Get a little deprecation warning, get it from the right spot or the right spot going forward. Oops, apologies. I can't scroll this very easily. We'll do that throughout. There'll be a bunch of them that you'll see when you port your code. Should be no problem to take care of that. I just wanted to show you that's the kind of thing you'll see as a deprecation warnings. But I think the really fun stuff is all in the transactions. So let's go over to there. As Graham said, a transaction runs. Let me scroll down to the bottom. Pardon the scrolling. I know that's hard to follow. Basically you just do transactions.run, give it like say a lambda, or in our case, we're just going to give it a function, and that function's up here, update docs or what have you. And we take an attempt context and just call functions on it. In this case, we're going to get a couple documents. Then we're going to replace the document context or contents with something else. In this case, the documents are super simple. They just have a count. One starts at 20, the other starts at 0, and we just increment the first one, or decrement the first one, increment the second one, and there you go. I thought I'd show a little bit about configuration here too, which probably makes this a little more of a, I don't know, crowded. I probably could have started without that in retrospect. But in this case, before I make the cluster, I want to say, hey, by the way, there's a transaction config where I want the majority as the durability level, which, by the way, is the actual default. But you can put whatever you wanted in there. Then we just make a cluster as normal. I thought when we were at it, we would insert the docs in a transaction if we wanted, and then update them and then get them. So those are the three functions. They're all really super straightforward. And then really all that happens is we insert the docs in a transaction, might as well. We get them just to see that they look right, and that'll print out what they look like. Then we'll do 20 transactions and print out what they look like at the end. I popped in another one, although we have up here somewhere there, that's our transaction config. So overall, all our transactions will always be durability majority. But as you're doing various things throughout with this same cluster, maybe some of them you want some other options to be different. So a subset of those options or those configuration options can be put in a transactions options object and passed in as the per config transaction config. I don't really like the name of that. That was the old name of the options before we integrated it into the SDK. So there'll probably be another way we can call this, like we just call it options, or do the clever thing that we do throughout most of the SDK and just allow you to put the keyword options that would fill out pieces of that options separately along this line. I haven't done that yet for transactions, so I show it explicitly here. But anyways, this will then make this have a 20 millisecond expiration time, which should be more than enough to just get two docs and update them. And when we run this, what we should see is, there you go. We started with a count of 20 and 0 for doc 1 and 2. It ends up the other way around. And we rolled around 20 times until we got a transaction failed, saying that, well, the reason it failed is if we go up here, as soon as the count became 0 or less than 0, we raised our own Python exception. Just in my case, I said runtime error doc 1 exhausted. And that tells this transaction to roll back. And then since at that point we're done, because that's when the loop bails out and we're done. And that's basically how you want to do your transactions. Just if you decide because of the logic inside that you need to roll back, just raise any old exception, doesn't matter what. and you're done. Otherwise, when this function finishes, then it'll just automatically commit. We don't have a context commit, context rollback, or anything like that because it's just not necessary. This seems simpler. It's less stuff to call, so we went that route. So that's a blocking transactions. I think this is the way most of us, me anyways, tend to think about transactions. If you ever did them in SQL, which you probably did, this is kind of how you think of them. Again, get some documents, do something to them, replace the contents, change a part of the contents, whatever. But that's not the only thing you may want to do. There's no particular reason, like when you're getting these two documents, that you should do them serially. Similarly, when we're doing these two replaces, we've already decided what the content should be. Namely, one should be one bigger, one should be one smaller. We don't really need to wait till one's replaced to replace the other one. So we can do the same thing asynchronously. I'll get to this in a moment. This is just I mentioned logging, so I thought I would show it. So let's do it with async IO if you're familiar with it. Whenever you're doing anything with async IO, at least within Couchbase, import async IO first. Just do it at the top. I think it says that in a number of places in the docs. Otherwise, this is all pretty much the same documents. Basically, this is the same as it always was in terms of the API for async Couchbase stuff. There's the insert docs. Now you'll notice these transaction functions are async as well, and you do await at the end all the futures inside. The idea being you don't want to say have this function finish before some task inside is started, because at that point then it'll just try to commit and you won't get what you think you're going to get. So I think that generally speaking, something like this is the way to go. This is a super trivial example, of course, where you can just gather up some inserts in this case for inserting the docs, and they both execute after the await, and then we're good to exit. Same thing down here, except we wait twice, once for the gets and a second time for the replaces. Then we know everything happened before the async function returns. Similarly for the get docs, we just await on top. And so we do the same order of things. We insert them, get them, and then on a loop, do the exact same thing as before. Just run the update docs call, update them until it's done. And similarly, somewhere on here, well, I should have had a configuration for that, but somehow it got lost. I'm using probably not the greatest version of this IDE. Oops. So I have to do this one on the fly. Apologies. Let's just do it once. And let's go to, we are doing async transaction. And so, yeah, the sausage is made, I suppose. So in theory, that should do the same thing. Starts at 20 and 0. We eventually get to 0 and 20. Nothing really changed there. So the one thing you notice here that I wanted to point out is you see some logging that we got. We have a few places in the code, this is 4.0, where we log things, but it's different between async and non-async, and this just happens to log. We can And we might as well just get rid of some of that. If we do this, if we import logging and then just say, I only want to see the critical stuff, then we don't see that anymore. I think by default, Python logging set to info or something like that. I'm not entirely positive. I don't recall. We could do something different. We could do something fancier. Do a bunch more logging. Import logging, give it some sort of basic config. Say we put it at debug level. We'll go ahead and import OS and then get this particular, or set in this case, is ICB log level. Basically equivalent to what we used to do with lib Couchbase. And they're right, that is kind of ugly. We tell it, okay, for the internal stuff, the C++ client and the transactions client, set your logging level to debug, then we'll see the debug logging levels, or the debug logging from that. Then we go ahead and we can run this again. And we see all sorts of stuff, all sorts of logs. This is all the internal stuff for the, well, it's not all internal, so that's actually a lot of that is all within a Couchbase. But if we go up a ways, we'll eventually find some others. Oh, well, you guys don't want me to watch me scroll around. Trust me, there's a ton of logs in there. But if we go to the bottom of this, yeah, it all worked out the same. We eventually got that on error that we saw before. And we're good. So that's a really quick run through of blocking and async transactions. I picked really simple examples because I didn't want to get bogged down in what we're doing so much as just, this is how we go about it. And I think it's really simple, pretty simple to use. I made a conflicting example, which sounds weird, but this is just, what if we want to do that same async? This is the same async code, so I won't show the above part. But maybe we want to run a bunch of them together. Like I want to run 3 of these transactions trying to do the exact same thing at the same time. If we want to do something like that, it should still obviously work. It's just going to take longer because they're going to conflict. Some guys are going to have to roll back. Using the default timeouts, like 15 seconds for the expiry for the transaction, should be plenty of time for them to work out their conflicts and run. And if we run this, we should still work, which we do. It's still pretty quick, but you'll see probably a pretty fair number of errors that got called along the way, all these CAS mismatches. And those are the multiple transactions trying to do the same thing, the same documents conflicting with each other. But it works itself out. Nobody even gets a real problematic actual transaction failed. These are all just individual operations getting on errors and then just retrying until they work. So I thought I would just show that just because I think it's kind of cool. Stuff really works. Let's see. I think that's it. If I go back to my README and blow it up, I guess now it's blown up. I think that's all I really wanted to talk about. Apologies, my markup skills are poor.
That's all right.
Yeah, I think this is the main thing. There's a few other known issues, like the little bugs we fix. I expect the first couple patches to have a ton of little improvements.
Okay, cool. So yeah, one, thanks for coming to talk, but 2, it looks like the SDK 4.0 is a pretty big deal. It's a vast improvement. Obviously things improve over time, but this is a pretty big. I know that the version number is a jump, right? That kind of indicates something, but this really is a rethinking, right, of the SDK and what we're kind of doing here. So a couple things about logging. A lot of times people ask a lot of questions about that. So I thought that was really good that you kind of touched that to kind of explain. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, just remember logging is kind of it's like you're helping yourself, but you're also harming yourself, right? Because you can't take. So I just want to kind of confirm this, right, from an expert. Remember that when you turn on logging, it's a performance hit, right? And so when you're trying to troubleshoot things like performance, you're actually not necessarily helping case all that much, right? So this is standard computer science stuff, right? But when it comes down to a lot of times, especially in the forums, we get a lot of people that are complain about X, Y, and Z, and then you go look at them, and you're like trying to explain to them. Well, in production, if you turn logging on, that could be, if you're talking like a million records you're trying to do over 10 seconds, logging all that's going to be a pretty big performance hit, right? So with great power comes great responsibility. So I recommend turning logging on when you're debugging things. But if you're not, just remember that logging is going to cause you some performance hits. And that may cause new bugs to come out that you didn't want because of the fact that you're maybe getting timeouts, for example, because of the fact that it's taking so long, especially when we start about async.
Oh, yeah. As a matter of fact, I've worked in a number of places where, because the code was buggy, we had high logging levels. But because the error handling in the code was buggy and the logging, which was slowing everything down, tickled those things, we were actually making it also more buggy. And I think most of the time in production you want like critical or something like that, where you just see like what's hopefully very occasional messages that are of import that you should really look at. But the reason I wanted to bring it up and talk about it is because all of us, when we're developing, want the logging while we're developing.
Absolutely, right? No, I totally agree, right? Especially when you're trying to figure out what's going on in the universe. Why doesn't this work? And half the time it's my code, right? I fully admit, half the time it's my code, but I'm trying to figure out why my code's broken. And logging is like, it's a critical thing. Just to remind people, though, a lot of times, especially when you get into forums, obviously we want logs. I mean, logs are awesome. They tell us, they can tell us so much information. So if you are a person that you're having a problem, you want to post in the forums, anytime you can provide us logs with that or like detailed information, it really helps. I only know this because I recently had a couple Python questions come on, and that's one of the things we usually will ask people is, hey man, turn on the logging. A couple quick things also about this. The documentation team has really been working overnight, and they have got the 4.0 documentation up to date. So one, we have really great documentation for the Python SDK. I highly recommend people go check that out. I'm going to post a couple links here for the documentation that will hopefully show up here. The other thing that most people don't know, and I think it's the most well-kept secret, is that on the documentation site, there's a link to the API documentation. And the API documentation is awesome. If you want to go, like, I know earlier you were talking about, like, some differences we did with Couchbase, the cluster options, right, and where they were and stuff. API documentation is amazing for finding this stuff out. You can go grep the code and stuff if you want, but I love the API documentation and all the work you guys did to get that stuff done. And when I started, I wrote the Fast API tutorial on the developer portal for how to use Python with Couchbase 7. And I went into the API documentation first, and it was like, okay, yes, this is exactly what I need to figure out like how all this stuff works. And I highly recommend people check it out. For some of the stuff that has changed, obviously you've talked about this a little bit already. Just a reminder, folks, that there is some stuff that's deprecated. The documentation has really good stuff about that to kind of get you up to speed. Would you agree that it's more of, we're just trying to get it so it's simpler to use, right? I mean, we're not trying to anger the entire development community and world, right? We just admit that there's easier ways to do this. And in Python especially, you want to try to make the code as easy as possible to read. Readability is a huge, most people don't realize readability is where half the bugs come from. Somebody can't read the code, they don't understand it, they make assumptions, and next thing you know, you have a defect, right? Or regression, even worse. And so I think this is really important that we do make these changes to make the code a little bit more readable, make it where it feels natural also in Python. I think that's the other thing I'd say in 4.0. We're getting to where this definitely just feels really, really great for Python developers. Would you have any tips out there for Python developers that are getting new into Couchbase, they want to get started with Python and stuff. I know that some people will not fully understand, like, really you should be on 3, right? You should be on Python 3.2. I know there's a whole argument about this, but really 3.x is where you should be. 3.8 I think is released just about every platform. 9 is out there for, you can get it like on Homebrew if you're on a Mac, or WinGet and Windows and stuff. It's okay. It depends what your needs are and stuff. But do you have any recommendations for like Python developers trying to get in and learn Couchbase? Is there any like examples that they can go look at that maybe you have links to, or is there anything out there that you would recommend that they do?
Well, we have some examples that are going to live in the code, but we pulled them out of the repo just for the initial release.
Okay.
While we're tweaking them and making them like consumable, because like the way they occurred, or the way they came about, was we were writing our own and just messing around and trying stuff. This is before our test infrastructure was completely fleshed out, and we were just trying to sort of make sure that things were working, things looked right. We would poke around with new things. And then we're like, oh, let's turn these into examples. So there are some good examples coming from within the code, but the documentation includes a number of really good samples, and they're going to be getting better and better over time as we roll off the big push to push it out and roll back into sort of more of a maintenance mode. Then we'll have even more time to help the docs team, who've been great. One thing I should say about the docs that's really cool, and they pushed for it, is all the examples are runnable. They come from a bigger file that is 100% run, and it's run as part of the CI, so it's
tested.
Yeah, it's tested. Yeah, so it.
That's so cool.
The idea is that the very worst thing is to have the official documentation have a typo that has everybody repeat, or has a practice that we don't want, like a good example would be like you can close the cluster whenever you want. You can just say cluster.close, but obviously that happens when the object goes out of scope and so forth, which is how it should be. But we ask you, we're going to say don't do it unless you like. There's some reason you really, really have to. And the reason I'm going to say that is, well, A, I don't think you need to. It's a waste of time, probably. But B, and what's more important, is our tests actually did that. And, we're creating and destroying tons of clusters, for instance, and over and over and over. And every once in a while, we'll get a crash because it's tickling some really complicated edge case. Because you're getting rid of the cluster and shutting everything down over and over and over. There's some small little bug in there. Things like that, like practices we don't want in our examples. We'll make sure.
I would even say that the cluster, that's a good thing to kind of bring up, because people forget that the cluster, there's a handshake that happens, right? And that's a TLS handshake, and that actually takes time. So if you're creating a cluster object over and over again, you're going to see some performance problems because the fact that you have to keep doing the handshake over and over again. Where once a cluster object's created, the handshake's done. We trust the cluster. We don't have to go do all that work. And in production, I get it, in development environment, you're probably not running TLS. You probably have it disabled. Most developers do that, running in Docker. Get it, right? But in production, that's a bigger problem. So you won't see that in development. And that's one of the things that developers don't realize, is that they write all this code and it looks great in QA, it looks great in development environment. They bring it up to UAT or staging. Why is the performance so bad now? Well, it's because all these cluster objects you're creating, we have to recreate those, bring them on a stack and heap. Even though it's Python, this still exists in computer science, right? And the real problem is that all the handshake has to happen for each one of those. So caching your cluster object is just a massive performance hit or gain if you're when you're thinking about your Python code and stuff. I usually try to keep some kind of manager that keeps track of that kind of stuff and tell them that's his job. You do that and keep this database thing going.
There's a bunch of API differences, but like Flask or what have you, they have a way of having globals essentially, and I stash that over there. And
exactly. I know that
Did
it's a
it
dirty
with-
word.
Yeah.
Global is a dirty word, but in Python, it's not bad. It's not bad for this particular. It's like a static. I try to explain to people global is more like a static, in some other languages. It's not necessarily bad. Just don't abuse it, right? Just like anything. Ice cream is great in small doses. If you eat nothing but ice cream, it's really bad for you. Well, it turns out this is just like globals in Python. When used properly in a little tiny taste, it tastes great. It's perfect for you, but just don't do it too often. Otherwise, it's bad for you. It's bad health. Bad things will happen to you. I promise.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very cool.
I should be sure to mention, this. Although I'm presenting it, the bulk of the work outside of transactions was done by Jared, who really runs this, and he's done great work.
Awesome.
I wrote the C++ transactions, which will come out eventually on its own.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, I like Python, so I'm like, I'll stick it in Python with Jared because we like working together, and
Okay.
and so it was fun putting it in. It was really satisfying getting rid of some of the things that we felt hindered us when we used Python or Couchbase Python client, and so it actually worked out great. But he did great work. Like, let me just say, all the API docs work that he did is why they look so great, along with the docs team who did the website documentation so well.
Yeah. Well, Jared, I thank you from the bottom of my heart because, yes, that for developers, documentation is so critical. Without it, I mean, it's just, oh, yeah. So awesome. Well, let's see here. So 4.0 is out. What's the future look like for Python with us? I guess that's my final question. What are, like, over the summer as we get into the fall, what should Python developers be looking forward to? I know we're going to have some bug fixes, right? That's just no doubt.
I think there's going to be bug fixes. There's going to be a lot of examination of our performance. This is performance of the underlying pieces as well,
Yep.
the C++ transactions, the C++ client itself, and how we're interacting with Python. We're going to look at all of that. So I would think that the biggest changes they'll see is it'll probably get a little bit more community use, like keyword options that you can pop in will be supported within transactions a little better. Little things like that. I think there are a couple of things that we're missing. The big one's going to be open telemetry. We're going to pop that in certainly by summer, I would think. Ooh, I don't like to write checks.
Yeah. I would just say quarters. Sometime in the future, if you don't have a DeLorean, don't worry. Sometime in the very near future, you should be able to see some really cool stuff that's coming out. I'm more just curious, like what that is. So that's very cool.
And
folks,
Twisted transactions are coming out really soon.
That's good to hear.
I just I got waylaid with some other stuff, so I didn't stick the Twisted in because they're probably less people using Twisted than using async IO or just lock-in ones. So,
and so if someone's new to Python, real quickly, Twisted transactions versus async IO transactions, what would you say is from the difference between these two, outside of their different frameworks, obviously?
I think it's just syntactically.
Okay.
It's like if you already use Twisted and it's what you like.
Yep.
Then you'll feel comfortable using this. It'll look just like what you would expect.
So basically, for new people to maybe Python, it's like Coke versus Pepsi. They basically both are soda. They both are or pop or if you live in this like me, Coke. They both are there. They both will quench your thirst. They just have a little bit different taste to them, and it's really up to you to decide which one of those that you want to use. I prefer async IO myself, just because it seems to be a little bit more. I hate the word JavaScripty, but the syntax seems to match a lot of other languages when it comes to async. But that's just my personal preference, right? The cool thing is that we're giving people the options, so whatever syntax they're looking for.
Yeah, it's like whatever you're looking for. Like some people, if their hair is as gray as mine is, or you can see it here. That's right.
Yeah.
They remember G-Event, and
oh yeah.
I thought that was perfectly fine, but I think Twisted got a lot more popular, so we don't even support G-Event at this point.
Yeah.
But if you're using Twisted, like because Twisted was there kind of before async.io was part of Python's standard library,
Yep.
and you want to keep on using it. We want to be sure you're supported. I don't think that it's much different. I like async.io. I think I prefer it to Twisted, but I don't know. They're both.
There's a lot of frameworks that are now just moving to that direction. FastI API. There's a couple other that build your APIs as fast as possible out there that kind of just prefer async.io, which that's the reason why I used it. Quite honestly, was when I'm building APIs, it just seems that seems to be the framework that people go with. I think there's nothing wrong with Twisted either.
Yeah, that makes sense. Aaron, I think I'm more comfortable with async.io going forward because it's in the Python standard library. So I think
exactly.
I just as soon not use something supported by other people.
Sure.
If I have to.
And Python's kind of notorious for that. There's been a couple of API libraries that have just been abandoned, and then somebody else has to pick them up and make them better. And I'm not trying to say anything bad about the open source community, but sometimes that just happens, especially when it's Bob in his garage doing it. So you just have to look at that when you're using open source software. Common knowledge for developers out there. I always say if I'm a source library, I better read the code and understand if that person abandons it, it's not my code. So that's the way I look at open source, right?
Right.
And if
and they're not updating it, it's yours.
Yeah, exactly. So if I look at it and I don't like the way it looks, then I probably should look somewhere else. Folks, well, I think this is all the time we have for this meetup. Graham, earlier, thanks again for showing up. And Dave, as always, it's awesome and entertaining talking to you. I know that Graham was giving you a little bit about your choice of IDE. I made the comment that I still think I'm super old. I think VI is the best editor in the world. Vim is awesome.
But I'm using PyCharm because I have to see what other people see. Most people.
Yeah, exactly.
And exactly. I'm finding this and CLion both. I kind of like.
Yeah, it's all right. I mean,
I don't know. I may be able to switch entirely.
So just
when I'm editing, though.
Yeah, exactly. I was just gonna say that they have the plugin for VI, and that's all I care about. All the IntelliJ, all these other products now have that mode in. So even Visual Studio for .NET developers have a VI mode. So
if I go back to one that doesn't have a VI bindings,
I'm out.
I mean, my productivity goes way down.
Yeah, I'm out at that point. Yeah, don't even get. Yeah, awesome. Well, Dave, again, you're super awesome. I appreciate it. We'll probably have to have you on again when the next release comes out. We'll talk some more Python stuff.
Yeah, maybe when I get C++ transactions.
Yeah, absolutely. That'd be really kind of cool.
I should mention that. It's the reason they're not released is they don't have their top layer, their public API.
Okay.
They have a kind of a less convenient but usable and functional underlying API. So we're just going to pop them on the top and get them out the door.
Okay, cool. Yeah, we'll do that. We'll bring you back and we'll take a look at that, see some code examples. Maybe you'll write some template code, some C++ template code. Awesome, cool. Well, folks, thank you again for attending our monthly stand-up. As always, I want to thank everybody for showing up. Stay safe out there, folks. We'll see you next month when we come back and talk about some more cool things. Take care, everybody. Have a great one.